Your family was pretty normal, right? Every family has its issues. Sometimes your parents were a little hard on you. Sometimes the punishment went a little too far. But that is just how things were back then. They did their best. They were stressed, they were tired, they were dealing with their own problems. And you turned out fine, didn't you? You have a job, you function, you get through the day. That is just how families are. Yours was no different from anyone else's. Stop lying to yourself, because here is the thing about the family you just described. It made you suffer, not in a way you can always put into words, not with a dramatic story you can point to, but in a way that quietly built who you are right now. In this video, you are going to recognize 5 signs that you grew up in a perfectly normal and deeply toxic family. Not because your parents were monsters. Most of them were not. But because some things that felt ordinary then were doing real damage. Watching this will not change what happened, but it might be the first time. The first time you will finally recognize what caused you to suffer in silence, and even without realizing it, during your childhood, and what you were trained to call nothing. The first sign is that everyone praised you for being mature, and you believed that was a compliment. Think about it for a moment. At some point in your childhood, probably more than once, an adult looked at you and said something like, "You are so mature for your age," or "You are so responsible," or maybe just, "I don't know what I would do without you." And you felt something warm when they said that. Pride, maybe. A sense that you were doing something right, that you were good. But here is what was actually happening in that house. You were not mature, you were adapting. There is a difference, and it matters. A mature adult handles adult problems because they have the emotional resources to do it. A child who acts like an adult does it because the adults around them stopped filling their role. And when that happens, the child does not grow faster. The child simply has no other choice. You learned very early that the way to keep things calm was to not be a problem. If your parents were fighting, you stayed quiet. If your mother was crying in her room, you made dinner without being asked. If your father came home in a dark mood, you read his face from across the room before he even sat down, and immediately adjusted your entire behavior to match what the atmosphere required. You became, without anyone naming it, the emotional manager of that house. Psychologists call this parentification. It is when a child takes on emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to adults, but the name is almost too clean for what it actually feels like. What it actually feels like is that you spent your childhood working. Not playing, not resting, not just being a kid who does not need to understand everything yet. Working, monitoring, managing, performing calm so that everyone else could afford to fall apart. And the cruel part is that it looked like a gift. Teachers loved you. Relatives praised you. Adults trusted you with things they should not have trusted a child with. And that felt like being chosen. Like being special. You were the dependable one. The one who never caused trouble. The one everyone could count on. What no one told you was the price of that role. Because while you were busy being the stable one, something was going quietly wrong. You were learning a belief that would follow you for decades. The belief that your value was directly connected to your usefulness. That love was not something you simply received. It was something you earned. And you earned it by not needing anything, by being easy, by always being fine. Now look at your adult life. Do you feel physical discomfort when you rest without having earned it first? Do you find it almost impossible to ask for help, even when you genuinely need it? Do you feel a low, persistent anxiety when things are too calm, as if you are waiting for the moment when something falls apart and you need to step in? Do you take on more than you can handle at work, in your relationships, in your friendships, and then feel guilty for being exhausted by it? That is not your personality. That is the program that was installed in you before you had any say in the matter. The child who was praised for being mature became the adult who does not know how to stop being responsible for everyone, who apologizes for needing things, who gives and gives and gives until there is nothing left, and then feels ashamed for running out. You were not mature, you were trained, and the difference between those two things is where your healing begins. But that was only the first sign. because there is something even quieter that happened in that house. Something that did not make noise, did not create scenes, and was almost impossible to detect. It happened every time you tried to feel something. The second sign is that your emotions were treated like a problem to be managed, not a truth to be heard. You were not allowed to feel in that house. Not in those words, of course. No one sat you down and said, "Your feelings are not welcome here." It was much more subtle than that. It was in the way your mother sighed when you cried, in the way your father changed the subject when things got emotional, in the phrase, "You are so sensitive," said with a tone that made it clear sensitivity was a flaw, not a quality, in the way sadness was met with, "You have nothing to be sad about," in the way fear was dismissed with, "Stop being dramatic," in the way your pain was made smaller every time you brought it out into the open, so you stopped bringing it out. It did not happen overnight. It happened slowly, through repetition. You would feel something, and then you would look at the face of the adult in front of you, and you would read very clearly that this feeling was not welcome right now, that expressing it would create discomfort, that it was easier, safer, and smarter to put it away. So you put it away, and then you did it again, and again, until putting it away became automatic, until you stopped even noticing that you were doing it. This is something that psychologists have studied for a long time. When a child expresses a real emotion and the adult responds by dismissing, minimizing, or punishing that emotion, two things happen. First, the child learns that their inner experience cannot be trusted. If every time you felt afraid, someone told you there was nothing to be afraid of, you eventually start believing that your perception of reality is wrong. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of your ability to know what is real being slowly dismantled. Second, the child learns to suppress. Not to process, not to release, but to bury. And what gets buried does not disappear, it accumulates. Think about this now. When someone asks how you are doing, what do you say? Fine, right? Almost always fine, even when you are not fine at all, even when something happened that genuinely hurt you, even when you are carrying something so heavy that your body is tired from the weight of it. You say fine, not because you are lying, but because the habit of putting your feelings away is so old that it operates faster than conscious thought. Fine comes out before you even decide to say it. Or maybe this is more familiar. Someone does something that hurts you. Maybe a friend cancels on you at the last minute for the 5th time. Maybe your partner says something that lands badly. Maybe a colleague takes credit for your work. You feel the sting of it. And then, almost immediately, you start negotiating with yourself. You think, well, they are going through a lot. Or, I am probably overreacting. Or, it is not a big deal. You talk yourself out of your own reaction before you even let yourself have it. You give everyone else the benefit of the doubt that you never give to your own pain. That is not maturity either. That is what happens when a child learns that their emotional reality is less valid than everyone else's comfort. And in your adult life, this creates a very specific kind of exhaustion, not the exhaustion of having done too much, though that is there too, but the exhaustion of having felt nothing for too long, of being disconnected from your own interior life, of knowing something is wrong, but being unable to locate exactly what it is, because you lost the habit of checking in with yourself so many years ago. This is why so many people who recognize themselves in this video describe a feeling of emotional numbness that they cannot explain. They have good lives on paper. They have reasons to be happy. But there is a flatness to things, a distance between them and their own experience. They watch themselves go through their days the way you watch a movie, present, but somehow not quite inside it. You were not born numb, you were taught to be. And if both of these first two signs feel familiar, if you were the responsible one who held everything together, and also the quiet one who put every feeling away, then what you are beginning to recognize is a pattern, not a personality, not who you are, a pattern, something that was built inside you by conditions that you did not choose. If this video is resonating with you, subscribe to this channel. There is always new content here about these patterns, where they come from, on what it looks like when people begin to understand them. You do not have to figure this out alone. There are many people watching this right now who feel exactly what you are feeling. The third sign is the one that most people recognize instantly, but have never been able to name. You always knew exactly what mood the house was in before anyone said a word. You could feel it the moment you walked through the front door. Something in the air. The particular quality of the silence. The way your father's jacket was thrown on the chair instead of hung up. The sound of dishes being placed a little too firmly on the counter. The tone of your mother's voice when she said hello. You read all of it in seconds. And based on what you read, you already knew. Tonight is going to be difficult. Or, something happened. Or, I need to be invisible right now. You were never taught to do this. No one sat you down and gave you lessons in reading emotional atmospheres. You developed this ability the way all living things develop survival tools, because you needed it. Because in your house, knowing what was coming gave you a few extra seconds to prepare, to adjust, to make yourself smaller or more helpful or less present, depending on what the situation required. This is called hypervigilance. It is what happens to the nervous system of a child who grows up in an environment where tension is unpredictable, and the adult's emotional states directly affect the child's sense of safety. The brain, which is extraordinarily good at learning, figures out very quickly that paying extremely close attention to every signal in the environment is the best strategy for avoiding pain. So it becomes a specialist in reading signals. Some family therapists describe a pattern where the child becomes the family's emotional thermometer. They are the one who senses the temperature of the system before anyone else. And often, without anyone asking, they take it on themselves to regulate that temperature, to say the right thing at the right moment, to redirect a conversation that is heading somewhere dangerous, to make a joke that breaks the tension, to be the thing that holds the room together when the room is about to split. You did not volunteer for this role, but you got very good at it. And being good at something that young, in that way, teaches you that this is simply what you do. This is just who you are. The perceptive one, the sensitive one, the one who always knows. What no one told you is that a child should never be the emotional regulator of the adults around them. That is not sensitivity. That is a child being conscripted into work that belongs to grown people. The anxiety in that house was not yours to manage. The conflict between your parents was not yours to absorb. The tension that filled the dinner table on certain evenings was not something you needed to fix. But you fixed it anyway, because no one else was going to. And here is what that cost you in adulthood. Your nervous system never learned how to be at rest. It learned to scan, to monitor, to stay alert for signals that something is about to go wrong. And it still does that every single day, even when you are nowhere near that house. Even when you are at work and everyone around you is calm. Even when you are with a partner who is not your father and not your mother, and is not angry at all. Your system still reads the room, still braces for impact that is not coming. This is why you might feel exhausted in social situations that should feel relaxing. Why a small shift in someone's tone can send a wave of anxiety through your body before your brain has even processed what was said. Why conflict, even minor conflict, even the normal friction that exists in healthy relationships, feels disproportionately threatening. Your body learned threat assessment in a house where threat was real. It does not yet know that the lesson can be unlearned. And there is something else that comes with this. When you grow up always scanning everyone else's emotional state, you develop a very particular blind spot. You become almost completely unable to scan your own. You are an expert on how other people feel, and a near stranger to how you feel. You can walk into a room and within 2 minutes you know exactly who is uncomfortable, who is hiding something, who is on the verge of an argument, but ask you how you feel right now, in this moment, and you will have to stop and think about it in a way that feels strange, almost unfamiliar, like trying to read a language you were never quite taught. This sign connects directly to the fourth one. Because the hypervigilance you developed, the constant monitoring, the self-erasure, it did not exist in a vacuum. It was the product of a very specific family structure, one where the rules were invisible, the expectations were enormous, and what looked like love was often something much harder to carry. The fourth sign is that in your family, There were no limits, only loyalty. This one is quiet. It does not announce itself the way the others might. It hides inside things that look like closeness, like belonging, like love. But underneath, it is something else entirely. In your family, privacy was suspicious. If you closed your door, someone wanted to know why. If you had thoughts you did not share, feelings you kept to yourself, that withholding was read as distance, as rejection, as not being a real part of the family. Your inner world was not yours. It was a collective resource, and using it for yourself, keeping any piece of it, felt like a small betrayal that you could sense even if no one named it. Autonomy was dangerous there. Wanting something different from what the family wanted was not simply a preference, it was disloyalty. If you wanted to spend time with a friend instead of coming to a family event, you were being selfish. If you had an opinion that differed from your parents, you were being disrespectful. If you felt something that the family did not agree you should feel, your feeling itself was wrong. The unspoken rule was clear. To be different was to be separate, and to be separate was to be abandoned. So you learned not to be separate. You learned to fold yourself into the shape the family needed, to not take up space that was not designated for you, to agree when you did not agree, to pretend to feel what you were supposed to feel, to erase the edges of your own individuality so smoothly that after a while you stopped noticing you were doing it. There is a term in family therapy for this kind of structure. It is called enmeshment. It describes families where the emotional boundaries between members are so blurred that each person's identity becomes entangled with everyone else's. There is no clear line between where you end and where your family begins. Your mother's anxiety is your anxiety. Your father's disappointment lands in your body like your own failure. Your siblings' problems become your responsibility. The family's reputation is your burden to carry. In an enmeshed family, love and fusion are the same thing. Closeness means having no separate self. And so the child who tries to develop one, who tries to have their own thoughts, their own preferences, their own emotional reactions, is not seen as growing. They are seen as pulling away, as becoming a threat to the unity of the system. What this does to you, long term, is something most people do not fully understand until they are sitting in front of a therapist in their 30s, wondering why they feel guilty every time they do something for themselves. Every boundary you try to set in adulthood feels like a betrayal, not because it is wrong to set limits with people, but because your nervous system learned that limits mean abandonment, that saying no breaks something, that having needs that are different from another person's needs makes you the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who does not love enough. This is why you over-explain, not because you are insecure exactly, but because you were trained to justify every autonomous decision you made. Why you are going there, why you want that, why you feel this way, as if your choices require a defense every time, as if the natural response to, "I need some time alone," should not simply be okay, but should require a presentation, evidence, a case argued and won. You might also notice this in how you struggle to know what you want. Not in a surface way, not just choosing what to eat for lunch, but in a deeper way. When no one is watching, when no one needs anything from you, when the pressure of the family system is temporarily lifted, do you actually know who you are? Do you know what brings you joy when you are not performing joy for someone else? Do you know what kind of life you would choose if the fear of disappointing people were not part of the calculation? For many people who grew up in families like this, the answer is uncomfortable, because so much of their identity was built around the family's needs, around being the right kind of family member, that when the family is not there as a reference point, there is a strange blankness where the self should be. That blankness is not emptiness. It is a self that was never given room to develop, and it is still there, waiting, smaller than it should be, quieter than it deserves, but there. I hope you haven't recognized any of these signs in your own family so far, but if, unfortunately, you have and want to vent, please share your story in the comments below. We want to build a strong community of survivors of toxic families where everyone reads about others without judgment, only understanding. The fifth sign is that you were the easy child, the one who did not need anything, and everyone was relieved. This one might be the hardest to see as a sign of anything wrong, because it looked so functional from the outside. You were not dramatic. You were not the one who caused the scenes or demanded the attention or pushed every limit until something broke. You were quiet, self-sufficient. You handled things. You dealt with your problems on your own. You did not burden anyone. You were, by every visible measure, absolutely fine, and the adults around you were grateful for it. In a house that already had enough going on, a child who did not require much was a relief. You sensed that. You understood, at some level too young to articulate it clearly, that your low-maintenance quality was your contribution to the household's fragile equilibrium. Your not needing things was a gift you gave to everyone around you every single day. But here is the truth that took years to surface. You did have needs. Every child does. You needed someone to notice when you were having a hard day without you having to announce it. You needed to be asked how you were doing and have the person asking actually wait for a real answer. You needed to be held sometimes without having earned it through usefulness. You needed to be loved not because you were easy, but simply because you existed. Those needs did not disappear because no one responded to them. They went underground. They learned to be invisible, to make themselves small enough that they stopped interfering with the surface appearance of fine. And the child who had learned to suppress them so successfully became the adult who, when asked what they need, genuinely does not know. The psychologist Karen Horney described what happens to a child when needing feels unsafe. When consistently, either through neglect or through subtle punishment, a child learns that dependence is dangerous. They develop what she called pseudo-independence. It sounds like strength. It looks like strength. But it is not strength. It is armor. It is the emotional equivalent of learning not to flinch when something hurts because flinching never helped. Pseudo-independence says, I do not need anyone. I handle things alone. I am not like those people who fall apart and require others to pick up the pieces. And for a while, maybe a long while, that armor holds. It gets you through a lot. It allows you to function in situations where others might crumble. It earns you respect and admiration. It makes people say, I don't know how you do it, but armor is heavy, and the person inside it is still there, still carrying those original needs, still waiting for someone to notice without being told, still hoping that at some point, love will feel like something received rather than something performed. In relationships, this plays out in very specific and painful ways. You become the partner who never asks for too much, who deals with disappointment quietly, who minimizes hurt to keep the peace, who says it's fine when it is not fine, and then feels invisible and resentful in a way they cannot fully explain even to themselves. Because how do you ask for what you need when you were trained to believe that having needs at all was a form of imposing? Or you might go in a different direction entirely. You might become someone who attaches very quickly and very intensely to anyone who offers warmth, because warmth was so rationed in that house that when you encounter someone who offers it freely, some part of you that is still very young and very hungry reaches for it before your adult reasoning can evaluate whether it is safe. This is not neediness. This is starvation responding to the sight of food. What was stolen from the easy child was not material. It was not opportunities or experiences or objects. What was stolen was simpler and more essential than any of those things. It was the experience of being cared for without having done anything to deserve it, of being seen not for what you provided, but for who you were, of learning that your presence alone, not your compliance, not your usefulness, not your emotional self-management, but just you, was enough. You did not learn that. And that lesson, that foundational, bone-deep sense that you are enough exactly as you are, that is what the rest of your life has been quietly working around. Every relationship where you work too hard to be loved. Every moment where you override what you feel to keep someone else comfortable. Every time you are more concerned with whether the other person is okay than with whether you are okay. That is the easy child still trying to earn a love that was always supposed to be free. If you recognized yourself in any of these 5 signs, I want you to sit with what that means for a moment. Not with guilt. Not with anger, though anger is allowed and it will probably come eventually, but with something closer to understanding, because what you just did, sitting here and watching a video that named things you have been calling normal for most of your life, is not small. Most people never do it. Most people spend their entire lives giving those signs different names, calling them personality, calling them just how things are, calling them nothing. They live inside those signs until the patterns have cost them everything: relationships, identity, the ability to feel anything that is not exhaustion. You did not do that. You are here, and that means something. You are a survivor, not in a dramatic sense. Not in the sense of someone who overcame a single visible catastrophe and has a story to tell at a podium. But in the most real and unglamorous sense of the word, you survived a childhood that required you to be an adult before you were ready. You survived an environment that systematically taught you that your feelings were too much, that your needs were a burden, that the safest thing you could do was make yourself smaller. You built entire systems inside yourself to get through that, and those systems worked. They got you here. The problem is not that you built them. The problem is that you kept running them long after you left the house where they were necessary. That is not weakness. That is just what happens when survival strategies do not get the message that the emergency is over. When the nervous system that learned to stay alert in a genuinely unpredictable environment keeps being alert in environments that are, actually, safe. Healing from this is not about becoming someone different. It is not about dismantling everything you are and starting from scratch. It is about learning, slowly and imperfectly, to tell the difference between what you chose and what you were trained to do, between what you genuinely feel and what you were taught to perform, between the love that costs you pieces of yourself and the love that does not ask you to pay. It starts with recognition, which is exactly what you just did. The 5 signs you grew up in a toxic family are not indictments. They are not evidence that you are broken or that your life is beyond repair. They are simply a map of where you came from, and therefore a map of where you are. And a map, once you have it, does not trap you in one place. It shows you where you have been, and it opens up the question of where you want to go next. You were the mature one, the quiet one, the easy one, the one who could read a room before anyone else, the one who erased their limits to keep the peace. You were all of those things because a child in an impossible situation does what children do. They adapt, they survive, they make it work, and you made it work. Now the question is a different one. Not how do I survive this, but who am I when surviving is not the only thing on the table. That question does not have a quick answer, but asking it, honestly, for the first time, is already the beginning of something. Write what came up for you in the comments below. The act of putting it somewhere outside of yourself, even once, is already different from keeping it buried. And if no one has said this to you yet in a way that you were able to receive it, what happened to you was not nothing, and you were never the problem.